I'm telling this now because enough time has passed that the memories don't feel like they're clawing at the inside of my chest anymore. They still surface at night, though, especially when I hear footsteps in a hallway or notice someone standing a little too still for a little too long. What happened to me didn't involve anything supernatural. That's what makes it harder to forget. It was ordinary, slow, and quiet, and it happened in a place where I believed I was safest. 3 years ago, I moved into a small apartment building just outside the downtown area of a mid-sized American city. It was one of those brick buildings from the 1970s. 4 floors, no security desk, no cameras that I could see. The landlord lived out of state and handled everything through email. It wasn't ideal, but I was newly single, trying to cut costs, and the rent was low enough to ignore the small warning signs. At the time, I thought discomfort was just part of adulthood. The building itself had a strange atmosphere, though I didn't recognize it as strange right away. The hallways were narrow and poorly lit, with yellowish bulbs that hummed softly at night. The carpet was thin and worn, flattened into dark paths where years of footsteps had passed. Sound carried easily. I could hear doors opening 2 floors away, water running through pipes, someone coughing late at night. It felt intimate in a way I couldn't control. For the first week, everything was normal. I went to work, came home, unpacked slowly. Most of the other tenants kept to themselves. I saw an older woman with grocery bags on the 2nd floor once, a couple who argued quietly in the stairwell, and then there was the man from the apartment across the hall. I noticed him on my 2nd night there. I had stepped out to take the trash down, and when I locked my door, I realized his door was already open. He stood halfway in the doorway, like he had been about to leave, and stopped when he saw me. He was tall, maybe late 30s or early 40s, with neatly combed hair and wire-frame glasses. He smiled quickly, politely, the way people do when they don't want to seem threatening. He introduced himself as Mark. His voice was calm, friendly, slightly too practiced. I told him my name, made small talk about the building, the weather, the unreliable elevator. Nothing about the interaction stood out as alarming. If anything, I remember thinking it was nice to know at least one neighbor. Over the next few days, I began to notice how often I ran into him. Almost every morning, he seemed to be leaving his apartment when I left mine. In the evenings, I'd hear his door open not long after mine closed. At first, I'd chalked it up to coincidence. Same floor, similar schedules, that happens. But then the small things started to pile up. One Sunday afternoon, I had stayed in all day, cleaning and catching up on laundry. Around 4, there was a knock at my door. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I looked through the peephole, Mark was standing there, holding a small cardboard box. He said he had accidentally received one of my packages. The label had my name and apartment number on it. I hadn't noticed it was missing. I thanked him, took the box, and that should have been the end of it. But as I was closing the door, he mentioned something inside the package. Something specific, something he couldn't have known unless he'd opened it. I froze for half a second too long. He laughed softly and said he had just guessed, said he had ordered something similar once. I nodded, closed the door, and leaned against it, my heart racing. I told myself I was overreacting. I told myself there was a logical explanation. That night, I slept with my bedroom light on for the first time since moving in. Looking back now, I understand that this is how it starts for a lot of people. Not with violence or threats, but with patterns you don't want to see, and instincts you learn to ignore. At the time, I still believed that being polite and rational could keep me safe. I didn't know yet that someone else in that building was paying much closer attention to me than I ever realized. After that Sunday, I stopped pretending everything was normal. I still went to work, still nodded politely if I saw Mark in the hallway, but something fundamental had shifted. My apartment no longer felt like a refuge. It felt like a space that was borrowing temporarily, somewhere I wasn't fully alone even when the door was locked. I started double-checking the deadbolt at night, pressing on it with my hand until I felt resistance. Sleep came in fragments, broken by every creak and muffled sound from the building. I began noticing how carefully Mark watched without appearing to watch. He never stared outright. He lingered in peripheral vision, reflections in the stairwell mirror, shadows at the end of the hall. If I opened my door and he was already outside, he always had a reason. Trash, laundry, a phone call he claimed had dropped. The excuses were ordinary enough to be believable, but the timing was too consistent to ignore. The strangest part was how well he seemed to know my habits. One evening, I came home earlier than usual after leaving work sick. As I unlocked my door, I heard movement across the hall. Mark's door opened almost immediately, as if he had been standing on the other side waiting. He looked surprised to see me, just for a second, before smoothing his expression. He commented on my early return, said he hoped I was feeling okay. I hadn't told anyone at work I was leaving, let alone a neighbor. That night, I checked my phone settings, my laptop, even my Wi-Fi router. I convinced myself it was paranoia, but the thought wouldn't leave me. I bought a cheap doorstop alarm and wedged it under my bedroom door when I slept. The sound of it scraping slightly against the floor became a strange comfort. Things escalated quietly. I found small marks near my doorframe one morning, thin scratches near the lock that hadn't been there before. Another time, I could have sworn the position of items in my living room had changed while I was gone. A chair angled differently, a cabinet not fully closed. Each instance was just subtle enough to be dismissed on its own, but together they formed a pattern I couldn't rationalize away. The breaking point came late one night, a little after 2 in the morning. I was half asleep when I heard the unmistakable sound of a key entering my lock. Not fumbling, not hesitant, slow and deliberate. My body reacted before my mind did. I sat up in bed, heart pounding so hard it made me dizzy. The lock turned slightly, then stopped. There was a pause, followed by a soft exhale on the other side of the door. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. After what felt like minutes, the sound retreated. Footsteps moved away down the hallway. I stayed awake until sunrise, sitting on my bed with my phone in my hand, finger hovering over the emergency call button. When morning came, I called in sick and contacted the property manager. I told them someone had tried to enter my apartment. They sounded annoyed more than concerned, suggested it was probably a maintenance mistake. There was no maintenance scheduled. That afternoon, I went to the police. I felt embarrassed sitting there, explaining everything out loud. The coincidences, the feelings, the almosts. I worried they wouldn't take me seriously, that I would be told to relax, to stop assuming the worst. But the officer listening to me didn't interrupt. He asked questions, detailed ones. He asked about Mark by name, and that was when his expression changed slightly. Apparently, there had been a complaint months earlier from a tenant who had moved out abruptly. She had reported missing items, a sense of being watched, strange encounters with a neighbor across the hall. She hadn't had proof either. Nothing had come of it. The police asked for permission to check my apartment and the common areas. That evening, 2 officers walked the floor with me. When we reached the storage room in the basement, one of them noticed a padlocked door that wasn't on the building plans. The landlord claimed it was an old utility space. The lock was new. They cut it open. Inside, they found shelves labeled with boxes, names, apartment numbers, dates. My name was there too. Inside my box were things I recognized immediately. A missing sock, an old work badge I thought I had lost, trash I had thrown away days earlier, printed photos taken from the hallway, from the stairwell, from angles I didn't know were possible. Some of them showed me unlocking my door. Mark was arrested that night. They searched his apartment and found keys, copies, dozens of them, not just for the building, but for former residences tied to previous complaints. He had been careful, methodical, patient. He never forced entry. He waited. He learned schedules. He relied on people doubting themselves. I moved out within a week. I didn't sleep in that apartment again after the police finished their investigation. Even now, years later, I still check my locks more than once. I still feel a jolt of fear when I hear footsteps outside my door at night. What stays with me the most isn't what he took, or even what he planned to do. It's the knowledge that for months, someone knew my life better than I did, and I almost convinced myself that was normal. Story 2. I didn't realize how much that year changed me until much later, when I caught myself memorizing license plates in parking lots and tracking reflections in store windows. By then, I was living in a different city, one where nobody knew what had happened before. I told myself that starting over meant I could leave the fear behind. I was wrong about that, but I didn't know it yet. This second story began almost a decade earlier, when I was 22 and still believed exhaustion was something you could power through. I had just graduated college and landed an entry-level job at a regional insurance office in a quiet suburban town. The building sat off a service road surrounded by identical office parks and nearly empty after dark. I worked late most nights trying to prove myself, volunteering for overtime no one else wanted. At first, I liked being there alone. The hum of the HVAC system, the glow of desk lamps in an otherwise dark office, the sense that I had the place to myself. It felt peaceful, controlled. I didn't have to perform for anyone. I could breathe. That changed the night I realized I wasn't actually alone. It started with small disruptions. A chair that wasn't pushed in the way I remembered, a desk drawer left slightly open. Once I returned from the bathroom to find my monitor awake, cursor blinking, even though I was sure I had locked my computer. I blamed muscle memory, stress, the long hours. I was young and eager to be competent, not paranoid. The building's security guard, a man named Raymond, made rounds every hour. He was in his late 50s, slow-moving, with a voice that always sounded tired. He waved when he passed my cubicle, sometimes joked about me working too hard. I found his presence reassuring. If something was wrong, surely he would notice. One night, around 9, I heard footsteps behind the row of cubicles near the records room. I called out instinctively, assuming it was Raymond. There was no response. The footsteps stopped. After a long pause, they resumed, slower this time, heading away from me. When I stood and looked, the aisle was empty. I told Raymond about it during his next round. He frowned slightly and said he hadn't seen anyone. He suggested it was probably cleaning staff, even though the cleaners came early mornings, not nights. His tone was dismissive, but not unkind. I let it go. Over the next few weeks, the feeling returned. Not every night, but often enough to make my shoulders tense when the office got too quiet. I began packing up earlier, leaving before 10. That's when the emails started. They were internal messages sent through the company system, unsigned. At first, they were mundane. Reminders about reports, comments about procedures, things that sounded like management, except they referenced details only someone near my desk would know. One message mentioned a sticky note I kept under my keyboard. Another referenced a mistake I had caught and fixed without reporting. I asked my supervisor about it. She said no one had sent those messages officially. IT ran a check and found nothing unusual. The messages stopped for a while after that, long enough for me to convince myself I'd imagined the whole thing. The turning point came on a Friday night. I was the only one left on the floor. I remember because the elevator doors closed behind the last employee just after 8, and the silence settled in heavily. I was finishing a claim review when I heard the sound of paper shifting nearby. Not footsteps, not pipes, paper. The records room door was ajar. I hadn't been in there all evening. I stood slowly, every instinct screaming at me to leave, but curiosity anchored me in place. From where I stood, I could see a shadow moving inside the room, passing between the shelves. I called Raymond's name. No answer. The shadow stopped. Then, very deliberately, the records room door closed. I don't remember deciding to run. I only remember being halfway down the hallway, my badge swinging wildly, my breath tearing out of my chest. I didn't stop until I reached the security desk. Raymond wasn't there. His chair was empty. His radio lay on the desk, switched off. The police were called. The building was searched. They found no one that night. But they did find something else a few days later, after reviewing access logs and camera footage that nobody had checked closely before. Someone had been clocking in under Raymond's credentials for months. Someone who wasn't supposed to be there after hours. Someone who knew the building as well as the systems inside it. And by the time they figured out who it was, that person was already gone.
The official explanation was delivered to us in a conference room with the blinds half drawn and the lights too bright. Management called it a security irregularity. That phrasing still makes my stomach tighten. They told us there was no ongoing threat, that procedures had been updated, that everyone should feel safe returning to normal operations. They avoided specifics, avoided eye contact, and ended the meeting early. Most people seemed relieved to accept that version of events. I didn't. I couldn't stop thinking about the access logs, about someone walking the building after hours, night after night, using a name we trusted. Raymond didn't show up to work again after that Friday. Later, we were told he had been let go pending investigation. No one said more. When I tried to ask, my supervisor gently suggested I focus on my workload and take some personal time if I felt unsettled. I tried, I really did. But the office no longer felt neutral. Every cubicle aisle felt like a blind spot. Every quiet moment stretched too long. I stopped working late altogether, even when it hurt my standing. I started leaving with the last group, sometimes inventing errands just to avoid being alone in the parking lot. I told myself this was temporary, that once the tension faded, I would go back to normal. Then I found the folder. It was tucked into a lower filing cabinet in the records room behind a row of outdated policy binders. I wasn't supposed to be there alone, but staffing was thin that afternoon and I needed a file quickly. The folder didn't have a label, just a strip of masking tape with something written faintly underneath, like it had been peeled off and reapplied more than once. Inside were printed emails, my emails. Not the ones I sent, but drafts, unsent versions, half-written thoughts I had typed and deleted, notes I had saved briefly before deciding against them, even fragments of personal messages I had composed during breaks and never finished, things that should not have existed anywhere but my screen, briefly before being erased. There were also photos, taken from behind me at my desk, from the hallway angled just enough to see my face in profile. One taken late at night, my reflection visible in my darkened monitor. I remembered that night clearly. I had felt washed then, too. I closed the folder and put it back exactly where I found it. My hands were shaking so badly I had to press them against the metal cabinet to steady myself. I didn't report it. I didn't confront anyone. Some part of me understood that whoever had done this thrived on access, not confrontation, on proximity, on being unseen. That evening, as I packed up to leave, I noticed something new. My chair had been adjusted higher. I never changed it. I liked my feet flat on the floor. I lowered it back down and left without looking around. I quit 2 weeks later. I told HR it was about stress, about needing a change. They accepted it quickly, too quickly. On my last day, I cleaned out my desk and avoided the records room entirely. As I rode the elevator down for the final time, I felt a strange mix of relief and dread, like I was leaving something unfinished behind me. For a while, life moved on. I found another job in a different town, a smaller office, better lighting, more people around. I convinced myself that whatever had happened was contained in that building, tied to that job, that version of me. Then, the email arrived. It came to my personal account, an address I had never used for work. The subject line was empty. The body contained only one sentence, written plainly, without emotion. "You left your chair too low." I didn't respond. I changed my passwords. I deleted old accounts, old files, anything that might still connect me to that place. I told myself it was a coincidence, a cruel joke, spam crafted to scare me. That explanation worked for exactly one night. The next evening, as I pulled into my apartment complex, I noticed a car idling across the lot. Its headlights were off. The engine was running. I couldn't see the driver clearly, just a silhouette behind the wheel. As I walked toward my building, the car slowly rolled forward, matching my pace, staying just far enough away to feel deniable. I stopped. The car stopped. I turned suddenly, heart hammering, but the car pulled away smoothly, disappearing around the corner as if it had never been there. I never saw the driver. I never proved a connection. The police told me there wasn't enough to go on. No direct threats, no physical harm, just fear and patterns, and the sense of being known too well. Years later, I still lower my chair before leaving any desk, even in empty rooms. I still close doors carefully and check reflections before I settle in. Some people think the danger ends when you walk away from it. I learned that sometimes it just learns to wait.
Story 3. I used to think familiarity was a form of safety, knowing the streets, the neighbors, the rhythm of a place. That belief died in a town I had lived in for most of my life, somewhere so unremarkable that nothing bad was ever supposed to happen there. When people talk about danger, they imagine unfamiliar places. I learned that the most unsettling things can grow quietly in spaces you stop paying attention to. This happened before the apartment and before the office job, back when I still lived in my hometown. I had moved back temporarily after my father passed away, staying in the same house I grew up in while I figured out what came next. The neighborhood hadn't changed much. Same cracked sidewalks, same rows of modest houses, same people who waved without really looking at you. It felt frozen in time, and at first that was comforting. I took a job at a local print shop to keep busy. The hours were steady, the work repetitive. I walked there most mornings, cutting through residential streets I could have navigated with my eyes closed. That routine became part of my healing process. Predictable, quiet, safe. I started noticing the man on the corner about 2 weeks in. He stood near the same bus stop every morning, always facing the street, never sitting on the bench. He was older, maybe late 50s, with thinning gray hair and a heavy jacket no matter the weather. At first, I didn't think much of him. People wait for buses. People linger. Small towns don't offer many places to be. But the timing was too consistent. No matter when I left the house, he was there. Early mornings, later afternoons, even one day when I left midday to run an errand. He never boarded the bus. I watched carefully after I realized that. He just stood there, hands in his pockets, eyes following traffic. The first time he spoke to me, it startled me more than it should have. I was passing the bus stop when he said my name. Not loudly, just enough to make me turn around. He smiled like we had met before. I didn't recognize him. He said he used to live down the street years ago, that he remembered me as a kid. That explanation should have reassured me. Instead, it made my stomach drop. I didn't remember him at all. After that, he found reasons to talk whenever I passed. Comments about the weather, about how much the neighborhood had changed, about my father, mentioning him by name. That was when I realized he hadn't just known me, he had been watching my house. I asked my mother if she remembered him. She said the description sounded familiar, but she couldn't place him. She told me not to worry, that people from the neighborhood often drifted back. I wanted to believe her. Then the notes started appearing. The first was folded neatly and placed on the hood of my car. Just a sentence, written in careful handwriting, about how my father would have been proud of me. I assumed it was from someone who had attended the funeral and meant well. I threw it away. The second was taped to the mailbox. It referenced something I had done that morning, a detail so small I hadn't mentioned it to anyone. That was when the fear settled in properly, heavy and cold. I changed my route to work. I drove instead of walking. The bus stop corner stayed in my peripheral vision, but the man was no longer there. That should have made me feel better. It didn't. One evening, I came home to find the porch light on. I always turned it off during the day. The door was locked. Nothing inside looked disturbed. Still, I slept with my bedroom door locked and the lights on. A few nights later, I heard movement outside my window. My childhood bedroom faced the side of the house, near a narrow strip of yard separated from the neighbor's property by a chain-link fence. The sound was subtle at first, like fabric brushing against leaves. I told myself it was an animal until I heard breathing, slow, measured. I stayed completely still, heart pounding, listening as footsteps moved away from the window. In the morning, I found footprints in the soft dirt beneath it, large, deliberate. The police took a report. They drove by a few times over the next week. Nothing happened while they were watching. It never does. The final moment came on a Sunday afternoon. I was alone in the house, packing boxes, preparing to move out sooner than planned. I heard the front doorbell ring. When I looked through the peephole, he was standing there, the man from the bus stop. Up close, his smile didn't reach his eyes. He held out a small object toward the door, one of my father's old watches, the one that had gone missing after the funeral. I didn't open the door. I called the police while he stood there patiently, as if he had all the time in the world. By the time they arrived, he was gone. They found his car parked 2 blocks away. Inside were photos of the house, of me walking to work, of my bedroom window taken at night. He was arrested later that week trying to leave the state. They said he had no prior record, no clear motive beyond obsession and opportunity. Someone who watched for years without acting, until he decided it was time. I moved out of that house for good. Even now, when I pass bus stops or familiar streets, I remind myself that knowing a place doesn't mean you know the people in it. Some dangers don't announce themselves. They just wait for you to stop looking.
The weeks after he was taken into custody blurred together in a way that still feels unreal when I think about it now. There were follow-up calls from detectives, paperwork my mother handled while I sat quietly at the kitchen table, staring at the same spots on the wall I had stared at as a child. Every corner of that house felt contaminated by the knowledge that someone had been observing it for years, memorizing routines, waiting for an opening that never fully closed. The police explained things carefully, clinically. He had never broken into the house at night before. He preferred daylight, moments when people assumed nothing bad could happen. He watched funerals, block parties, yard work, anything that gave him cover. He admitted he liked seeing how people changed over time, how grief made them predictable. Hearing that made me feel smaller than I ever had in my own home. I started sleeping in the living room with the television on, not because it helped me rest, but because silence made my thoughts too loud. Every creak of the house felt intentional. Every passing car made my muscles tense. I kept replaying moments from my childhood, wondering how many times he had been nearby while I felt completely safe. Packing was harder than I expected. Each box felt like proof that I was giving up something that should have belonged to me without fear. My bedroom was the worst. I avoided it until the last day, standing in the doorway and remembering how many nights I had slept there without ever questioning the darkness outside my window. When I finally went in, I kept the curtains closed and my back to the wall. On the morning we left, I walked through the house one last time. I checked the locks out of habit, even though I knew it didn't matter anymore. The house was quiet, empty, stripped of familiarity. It felt less like a home and more like a structure that had failed at its one job. For a long time after, I blamed myself for not noticing sooner, for dismissing the discomfort when it first appeared. Therapy helped me understand that vigilance isn't instinctive when you've been conditioned to trust a place your entire life. Familiarity lowers defenses. That's what he counted on. Years later, when I finally felt stable enough to drive through my old neighborhood, I did it. Slowly, windows up, doors locked. The bus stop was still there. The corner looked exactly the same. Someone new stood waiting, scrolling on their phone, unaware of the history soaked into that patch of concrete. I didn't stop. I've learned that survival doesn't always come with closure. Sometimes it comes with habits that never fade and a quiet awareness you carry into every new place. I still look twice at people who seem too familiar. I still trust unease even when I can't explain it. Because the most terrifying lesson I learned wasn't that someone watched me. It was that they did it for years, and nothing about them ever seemed